Like most of Shakespeare's plays, Julius Caesar was written in the late Elizabethan period, 4 years before Queen Elizabeth's death in 1603. This was an anxious period for the English because although Elizabeth was obviously near her death when Shakespeare was writing in 1599, she had no heirs to whom she could pass on the throne. There were widespread fears that England would be plunged into another civil war in the struggle to find the next monarch, which is what happened before Elizabeth herself took the throne. This fundamentally shapes the thematic concerns of Julius Caesar. It's unlikely Shakespeare feared that the ageing Elizabeth would be assassinated like Caesar, but upon her death, there was quite likely to be the kind of chaos that Brutus and Cassius stirred up. Considering the tragic downfall of Brutus and Cassius by the play's end, it's clear that Shakespeare is sending a strong signal to any would-be aspirant to the throne not to stir up any conflict, even with seemingly moral goals. As so many Shakespeare plays didactically warn us, ambition is toxic and power always corrupts.
Hey team, just a reminder, if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps the channel out, and our next upload could be on something taught in your next class. Thanks, and back to the video.
Unfortunately, the situation Shakespeare warned against occurred in 1642, when civil war broke out partly because of the political instability caused by Elizabeth's lack of an heir. Thankfully, he wasn't around to see his country go through the domestic fury and fierce civil strife that plagued his imagined Rome. But in any case, when you write your essays, it's crucial to understand the political events within the play as a reflection of Shakespeare's fear of an impending power vacuum within his own society. And the tragic downfall of Brutus and Cassius as a pointed warning to Elizabethan aristocrats with similar ambitions for power. Now that we've unpacked the political context in which Shakespeare was writing, let's look at the concept of the great chain of being, which was one of the most influential Renaissance ideas that influenced Julius Caesar. The great chain of being was a belief in a sacred order that underpinned all existence. It was a strict hierarchy in which everybody had a place. At the top was God. Beneath him was the king, who served as God's representative on earth. And below were the people, who had to serve the king. The Elizabethans thought that obeying that sacred structure would preserve peace and order. However, when someone oversteps their place, like when Brutus kills the leader he is supposed to serve, the chain of being is thrown into chaos. That's exactly what happens upon Caesar's assassination. Brutus's sin sends the natural world, the heavens, and especially his own mind helter-skelter, until his death allows the sacred hierarchy to be restored. Now let's look at another dominant contextual concern that shapes the ideas of Julius Caesar. Shakespeare was writing in a period that straddled two paradigms, which are like ways of thinking about the world. Religious thought, especially Christianity, had dominated the Middle Ages and still underpinned the way Shakespearean audiences would have conceived the world. But at the same time, the Renaissance was in full bloom, and it inspired new philosophies like humanism that challenged old religion in the way they embraced the power of the individual. So, in Julius Caesar, Shakespeare is simultaneously exploring the old world religious paradigm, characterised by superstition and determinism, which was the belief that everyone's life was determined by fate, not free will, and new humanist ideas that individuals could control their own destiny. Obviously, the ghosts and visions and constant allusions to hell and heaven strongly evoke the religious ways of thinking during the period, as do some of the characters' convictions that their futures are determined by the stars. But Shakespeare deliberately leaves it open to interpretation. Are all these seemingly supernatural happenings just the hallucinations of madmen consumed by guilt? Maybe their downfall isn't a result of some predestined life course, but their own decisions. This reflects humanist beliefs in free will, and it's important to consider Shakespeare's exploration of fate versus free will as part of the wider battle between traditional Christianity and the emerging philosophy of Renaissance humanism. There are also two more big contextual factors that guide Shakespeare's choice to explore the past. The first was that the Renaissance period in which Shakespeare was writing was characterised by the rediscovery of ancient sources that were largely untouched during the Dark Ages, and these insights into the lost empires of Rome and Greece inspired a newfound fascination with the classical world. The other main reason Shakespeare used Rome as his backdrop was because it was too controversial to comment on his political period directly. It would have been scandalous and insulting. He might have even been arrested if Shakespeare portrayed Queen Elizabeth or any nobleman directly. So he resorted to using a form of allegory, which means a story with a hidden political message, to make a subtle comparison between the chaos of ancient Rome and that of Elizabethan England, without being able to be accused of embarrassing the Queen or slandering her nobles. To wrap up this lesson, let's look at how context has shaped the form of Julius Caesar. Form can be a tricky concept to get your head around at first, but it basically means the type of text the composer has used and the unique ways in which they've used it. In Shakespeare's case, we know the form of Julius Caesar is a play, or more specifically, a dramatic tragedy, which is basically a play with a moral message in which everyone usually dies at the end. When analysing Julius Caesar, we can see Shakespeare mimicking the conventions of Aristotelian tragedy, which was a type of tragic play formulated by Aristotle, who was an ancient Greek philosopher. The form became popular in the Renaissance period as there was a rediscovery of ancient sources that had been lost when Europe was plunged into the Dark Ages. The dramatic tragedy was characterised by a few key narrative stages. The tragic hero first suffers a turn of fortune, called peripeteia. Then their hamartia, which is their fatal flaw, ambition in Cassius's case, leads them down a path of self-destruction. This suffering evokes the audience's pity, something Aristotle called pathos. Eventually, the tragic hero realises and accepts their doom in a moment called the anagnorisis, so that the audience can finally experience an emotional release in the hero's death, which is the phase called catharsis. If you go through Julius Caesar, you can see that the play's narrative follows these Aristotelian conventions almost exactly. We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons on Julius Caesar, check out our explanation of the play's plot summary.